Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of The Digital Download, the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live. Now globally
We've all just given
syndicated.
up now, haven't we?
I really have.
I was going to say, look how smooth it is when we just let Rob say it.
Yeah.
So smooth. The longest running business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now globally syndicated on TuneIn Radio. Today, we're talking about how listening leaders drive real change. We have a special guest, Howard Crace, to help us with the discussion. Co-founder of True, a company focused on helping organizations build winning cultures, Howard has over 25 years of experience in employee engagement and change communications. But before we bring Howard on, let's go around the set and introduce everyone. While we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience, so audience participation is highly encouraged. Right. With that, introductions. Adam, would you kick us off, please?
Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite, and very much looking forward to today. I'm always looking forward to the show. Do you know, I find every one of these shows fascinating because we always have really interesting people on. So, as normal, I'm looking forward to the show.
Absolutely. A quick pause. Andrew joins us. Good morning.
Hi, Andrew Slessor.
Hi, Andrew.
For those listening, we waved to Andrew, and it's reported that Andrew waves back. All right, thank you. Tracy, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I am Tracy Borison, founder of TLB Coaching and Events, where we're all about authentic marketing that works and generates ROI as not just a cost center. I'm a super proud partner of DLA Ignite, and I love listening. Well, I also love talking, but I love listening. So I'm going to practice that one today.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. Tim.
Hi, welcome, everybody. I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm famous for writing the book Social Selling: Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And myself, I am Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results. We help startups scale. I'm a proud DLA Ignite partner, and I'm famous for writing the book, The Social Enablement Blueprint: Stop Pitching and Start Selling.
Okay. For those listening, we're all holding up a book copy of Rob's book.
Yes, thank you so much for your support.
I know. I feel like I'm at my parents' house, so I don't have my access to my book repository. I can't hold up any of these books.
And it was
although to be fair, I do not have the hard copy of Rob's book.
But Tracy, for the people listening, they didn't know that, though, did they?
But they do now.
I like to be authentic. Did you hear that in my intro?
There we go. All right. As I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Howard Crace. Howard has a rich background working in senior communications roles at companies like Johnson Matthey, GSK, and EY. And he co-authored Leading the Listening Organization, which explores the importance of listening for organizational success. Let's bring him on. Howard.
Yay, welcome, Howard.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Rob. Hi, everyone.
Howard, let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, a lifetime really spent in the field of employee communications, which is not something that when you're studying, when you're thinking, where's my career going to go, you think, I know, I'm going to go into communications and engagement. It's not really something that most people know about until they fall into it. But I fell into it, and I stayed, and I've worked in those companies you mentioned and other big companies. And about 18 months ago, decided less than 18 months ago, decided it was time to do what so many others do, I guess. And with my partner, Anne-Marie, we set up True, so a business aimed at particularly helping businesses through change. I think change is done really poorly, and there's lots of data to support how poorly organizations go through change, not bringing their people with them on that journey. And for about the last 6 years, I've been working on this topic of listening with a couple of other colleagues. And we produced, it came out of an event we were at, and just had the chance to have a chat about what did listening mean. And I was a bit worried at that time, 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, that companies, well, communicators weren't listening rather than companies. You know, with this as we were seeing budgets being cut, travel budgets being frozen, people. So how, as a communicator, if you don't know where your audience is, how can how do you communicate effectively? I happened to go to an event. They ran a session called Open Space. Some of you will know Open Space, where you can really talk about anything. And with a couple of colleagues, that was in Copenhagen, Denmark, and with a couple of colleagues, we came back to the UK, and we decided that actually maybe there's some work to do around this topic of listening. It seemed to resonate with folks. And then over the next, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, we produced 4 reports. We did some best practice work. We did a small survey. We did a large survey with about 500 different businesses around the world. And then we did some focus groups. And then we thought, well, surely we're done now. And then someone, don't remember which one of the 3 of us, said, well, maybe we'll do a book. And that was the next thing. And then the book came out the end of last year, December last year. So leading the listening organization. And really, it's been a whirlwind tour over the last 6 months, sharing this message with particularly with communicators. But, you know, the job that we have really is, how do we get this into a wider circulation? Because it's not just around communicators. It's also, you know, there's lots and lots of people in the sort of HR talent world who have responsibility for and a stake in listening. And most of all, it's for leaders. You know, where I think the work has taken us is where we started thinking about this as a communications thing, and where the book's called Leading the Listening Organization on Purpose, because it's a leader thing. And I'm sure we'll get into that in the discussion. So over the next sort of 12, 18 months, I really would like to see how can we make this get this on leaders' agendas as much as on comms people and HR people type agendas.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And that book again, Leading the Listening Organization. And we have a few copies displayed on screen now. Thank you both for that. All right, so Howard, let's start with a foundational question. How does effective listening improve organizational performance?
Yeah, I think many ways, and you know, headline in terms of performance. First of all, I think it helps leaders make better decisions. But leaders recognizing that they don't know everything, finding the people that do know things, and then listening to what they have to say, which should help them to make better decisions. One of the things I think it's important to say about listening from the get-go is that this is not about democratizing decision making. Leaders make decisions, but they can make better decisions if they listen to the people who know more than they know. I think in many companies you see this old-fashioned hero leader culture sometimes, where leaders sort of feel they have to know everything. They have to have an answer for everything. In the book, we call it the parental trap. It's a bit like when you're growing up and you say to your parents, why do we do that? And they sort of say to you, because we do. And it's a little bit like that in organizations sometimes. You know, so I think that we need to sort of recognize good leaders say, I don't know everything. I can't possibly know everything. So I go and find the people who do. That helps me make better decisions. That's that's at the headline level. I think secondly, people, when you think about, one of the things when I'm doing events, and I start with the thing that says, think of a time when you personally felt listened to, personal life, professional life, wherever. How does it make you feel? Or how does it make you feel when you're not listened to? Because you're talking to someone who's multitasking, they're on their phone, they're looking at the sports scores or whatever it is. And you know that you feel valued, you feel good when someone listens to you. It's a natural thing from childhood, but we feel good when we're listened to. We don't feel good, we feel angry, different types of emotions when someone doesn't listen to us. So when the organization listens to us, we feel good, we trust it more, we feel more engaged. And if we believe in engagement, then I think we feel the benefits of engagement that come, in terms of staying longer, performing better, not being off so often, all of these things and more come, listening is has a big contributing part to that. But I think also, in terms of risk, in the UK at the moment, we've seen a very well publicized scandal with our post office, in America with Boeing, and others, where you see whistleblowers at causing the topics that these companies would hope had never come out, because in the post office case, for example, they willfully decided not to listen. And it's not like people haven't been telling them, you're getting this wrong, the people that were impacted by it, but they decided not to listen. So again, listening is a big contributing factor, I think, to risk management as well. And so, you're seeing all of these things just from performance. I mentioned change earlier. I think listening is critical in change, listening to people's worries and concerns, questions, suggestions. That helps you to build resilience. That helps you to go through change in a better way. So again, I think a huge part of where organizations are. Most companies I know also have innovation quite close to their set of values or wherever. But how do you innovate if you're not prepared to listen to other people, new ways of doing things? And I think if you look at the development of diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, you also see at the heart of DE&I is a desire to make better business decisions by listening to more diverse voices. So again, listening is fundamental as part of that as well. So it's everywhere, and it's the right thing to do. Why would we not want to listen to people? Why is it we believe we know best all the time?
So let's assume that I'm a leader and I absolutely buy this. And one of the things that we see a lot is that we position a concept in front of a client or a prospect, and they go, yeah, absolutely, I buy into that. But there's a huge gulf between the conceptual idea and how you're going to execute on that concept. So listening, a great example, you worked at GSK. So it's a massive company, and Tim and I met at Oracle, massive company. And you've got a company like that, and it's really important that the leadership gets to listen to the people across the organization. But there are a whole host of challenges. So firstly, there are multiple layers. I tell my boss, who's Tim, he tells his boss, who's Tracy, she tells her boss, who's Rob, and Rob is too busy doing other stuff to tell you because you're not listening, because you're the guy that runs it all. So first of all, what's the mechanism for listening in a large organization? And how do you create a culture where, and it's not about whistleblowing, but it absolutely is about me as somebody at the coalface having difficult conversations with you, somebody who's multiple layers above me, and say, I'm deeply unhappy about this, and here's why. Where I realize that, well, I don't fear that me giving you that information is a career-ending conversation that I'm having.
Now, how long have we got to answer these questions?
Howard, we're listening.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not quick fixes. I mean, let's try and keep it sort of short, and because all of these are really good points, Adam, and certainly in the book we cover them. So no particular order, just the order I remember from what you've said. So I've worked. I mean, look, leadership. This is why we say it's all about leadership, because it's leaders who ultimately, I think, set the direction for things like culture, the way we do things around here. So if leaders don't listen, if leaders are, don't see that, they see it as extra. And I'll come back to that in a second. Then it's going to be a challenge. And when we've been presenting and people say, communicators, for example, we get it, we support it, but my leader doesn't listen. How do we change that? It's very difficult. It doesn't just happen. One of the things we did in the book was actually we had some help from a Canadian academic, and she did some work for us, and she looked at about 18 different business schools around the world, the top MBA type schools in the US and Canada and Europe and so on, and looked at how many times listening is mentioned as in one of their courses, in one of their sort of course titles. 18 schools, one mention, and that was customer listening. And that's not entirely surprising. But what that tells you is that aspiring leaders, senior leaders of tomorrow, are not being, where they're taught about communications at all, they're taught about projecting one to many. They're not taught about listening. So we do have a challenge here. Now, I've worked with some amazing leaders. They get it naturally. They might need, a bit of help, but they get it. They understand that, bringing their people with them is a fundamental part of leadership. I struggle myself with people who say, I haven't got time to communicate as a leader. I haven't got time to listen as a leader, because what else should you be doing as a leader would be my challenge. Isn't that what you're meant to be doing? If you don't bring your people with you, what is it that you're leading? So I think, I'm not making light of it. It's a real challenge for us. It's probably the biggest challenge. And we do go in the book around what does a passive listening culture look like? What does an active culture look like? How do you move it? And there are many, many, many ways. I think we list in the book sort of 21 different methods of listening. So there's lots of ways of listening. For me, though, it's about mindset. The tools and the mechanisms come after. In many companies, unfortunately, what we see is we do a survey, the annual survey, and therefore we listen. Well, that's not true. There's many companies. I'm very pro good surveys, and I'm very anti bad surveys. And my experience in some of the companies you've mentioned is they do bad surveys, but they do surveys, and it's the way we've just always done it. And we're locked into this process, and it becomes a process, and it's not actually helping you to improve because of what people are telling you. You're not actually listening to the voices. So look, I think there's lots of ways of doing it, but we have to start with leaders. We have to find leaders who get it, and we have to use them as role models, and then, other people follow suit. And in some of the places, I worked with a brilliant CEO at Johnson Matthey. She listened, she really believed in her people. And amazingly then, her leaders, her team, and the team below that, they got it too, because they could see the direction it was going. So it's not easy, but we need to find those people who are going to help show us what's required, I think.
So I watched the Tim talk that you did, and that was really fascinating. And one of the things that you said in that, and I love this expression that you used, which was survey fatigue. Surveys are a really good idea, and you work within an organization, and you suffer from survey fatigue because you're asked so many questions. So explore that a little bit, because surely if I'm setting surveys, I'm asking for input. That's good, isn't it?
So I don't believe that is the real meaning of survey fatigue. Actually, I think that I'm not. I think if we believed that the things we said in surveys were listened to and acted upon, even if it's not the specific things that I say, but I could see that the big theme coming out of a survey was X, and therefore we're going to fix X, and I could see it being fixed, then I'm more likely to come and answer the survey the next time. I think survey fatigue means I'm fed up with surveys that mean nothing, that nothing happens with. And if I could see that actually they made a difference and that action happened, I'm more than happily keep responding because I see a value in it. So the fatigue is really because it's just, it's just an exercise. It's just a process.
We have a few comments from the audience. We have a LinkedIn user who says, love that the explanation about leadership not being a democratic position, but good leaders listen, leading to better outcomes. Janine Jackson shares with us, thank you for sharing insight about difficult conversations. I'm a sales leader from South Africa, and goes on to say, 100% love taking your people with you and the listening advice. Another LinkedIn user goes on to say, yes, bad surveys make things worse because organizations use them without doing the research required to gain understanding of the impact of the outcomes of the survey input. Andrew joins us again saying, are we now trying to humanize leader rather than running an organization by committee and dictating policies? And Stephen Welsh, yes, and it's a question of replying to surveys, listening and acting on it, avoids fatigue. Some great comments, and please keep them coming. Howard, I wanted to ask you this, though. Does an organization, well, let me preface it with this. I cannot envision many leaders, when asked point blank, do you listen, saying no. But does an organization need to have a formal process for listening to really confirm that they do in fact listen?
Yeah, I increasingly think so. I mean, I'd also say my own view of what I've been doing for the last 20 years has shifted quite a lot, in terms of comms and engagement through the work I've done on this. And personally, and this may not be a particularly popular view, but I'd almost bin all the channels and tools that communicators just take for granted, intranets and newsletters and so on, and just focus on dialogue and conversation and listening. And the more that we can do that, I think the more that we'll find people are coming with us on this journey. And one of the things that actually we've developed, in the book, we have a sort of a template for a listening audit. So, to help people to look at how they're listening. And actually some work that with one of the other co-authors, Mike, we've done is to now take that and say, how can you actually say to leaders, you may well think that you're listening okay, because you do a survey, because you may be visible in some sites every now and again. But you probably have a very different view of, to what employees actually think. And there's probably quite a gap there. And I think sometimes as leaders, I think, we call the first chapter of the book's called The Age of Listening. And I talk a lot about that, why I think now is the right time to be talking about this topic. Now, why I think that actually it's more than just a sort of a nice idea, but actually making a big difference. So I do believe that leaders will increasingly think I need to be doing this, but I don't know how to, or I don't know if I think we're doing it because we do a survey twice a year or because we have networks or whatever. I assume that we're doing it well. But I think if you said, so show me where things that you've listened to have helped you make better decisions or have changed your mind, or where you've learned things that you didn't know and how you've sort of shared that with colleagues. I think that when you can get into those conversations, then you can start to get people to think, yeah, I can actually do this better.
You mentioned that audit. So what are the common pitfalls in corporate listening strategies that the audit may help uncover? What are they getting wrong?
Well, I think because they'll just assume that they are listening because they do a survey. I have my definition of listening is in a sense, in a nutshell, is hearing, but then responding appropriately. In a sense, the definition of listening is feeling that you've been listened to, if that makes sense. And otherwise, I think it's just being heard rather than listened to. So responding appropriately, for me, is both words have to work. So you can respond, but not appropriately. So if you do a survey, and again, this is my experience in some of the companies I've worked in, I know it happens in many others, where you do the survey, but by the time the wheels have sort of been turning and all the data's been crunched and it's reported to the senior team and then re-reported and the next lot of presentations come out and Christmas comes, it's 3 months or more before you start to share some very high level responses with the audience. I don't think that's appropriate. If I ask you, particularly these days, why am I not hearing tomorrow almost? Because the technology can do it. So I think you have to respond, and you have to respond appropriately. And appropriately doesn't mean necessarily anything happens as a result, but I feel that I've been listened to. I've sat in a room with really good CEOs with about 20 people, and those 20 people come out an hour later really thinking that they've been listened to, even if what the CEO was very clever at doing is saying, why can't you do something about this? I don't need to, or the company doesn't need to, but you could do it. You're empowered to do it. And they just didn't know that they could, or they were waiting for someone to push them. But they come out feeling that they've been listened to. So there's no action necessarily, but it's appropriate because in the context of that conversation. So I think that, that's sort of the standard I would want to hold companies to. Do people feel that they've been listened to? Do they feel that they have a voice? One of my other co-authors, Kevin, said this, and I've stolen it from him, but I'll still give him the credit for it, is that until very recently, I think there's been a lot of work around the topic of employee voice. And what's the difference between employee voice and listening? Is not much difference, really. I think we're talking about much the same thing. But I think what it is that until recently, the onus was on the employee. That's where we were with employee voice. And I think, Adam, as you sort of were hinting at, the things like psychological safety and, do I feel that my voice, I can do it? Do I want to do it? Put my head above the parapet and say something? Is it going to be, well received? Is it going to make a difference? Now, I think with listening, the onus is on the organization to probably achieve similar sorts of goals. But it's changed the sort of responsibility from the employee to the organization, which I think is a good thing. And it's not just about surveys. There are many, many ways of listening, as I said. And the employee and the comms and the HR people and the leaders need to get together and think, what are the best things for our organization? How do we bring together, the voices that are going to help us perform better? And I think that's the challenge we have today.
I think one of the things that's coming up for me is, like, in a lot of different shows, we end up talking about values, human values and corporate values. And when I think about a lot of the values that you see on people's websites, I can't think of one where I saw listening. Right? And it's interesting though, because you see things like cares about people and those types of things, and then you look at some of the underlying activities that show people that you care about people, and I would say listening being one of those. And it's interesting that it doesn't seem to be making its way into clarity for people. And like a couple of people said, I don't think anybody goes into their day being like, I'm not going to listen to anybody today. But what I would love to just explore some of the things that, if we are people who care about listening, and people in the audience are listening and being like, yes, this is something I want to bring into my organization, what are those things that distract us from doing that?
Yeah, look, I think there's just time as much as anything. It's like it's too much effort. We've got so much to do, and to some leaders this will feel additional. This will feel like it's going to take more. Now, I would argue in big change situations, transformation situations, that if you put in place the right things to allow people the space and time to work out what that change means for them, to feel that they've been listened to, as I said before, with their concerns and their questions and their suggestions and their ideas. If you do that, I think you'll get to where you want to get to much quicker and in a much more sustainable way. But I think I can understand too that by saying those sorts of things, for the leader who thinks, I will communicate, but we'll do a town hall and we'll do an email from the CEO or a newsletter article, then I've communicated. And the brilliance of our logic, everyone will just fall into line and we can move much quicker. Unfortunately, I think that latter is how we do things. And I think where I'd like to be is very different. And I think we're making short-term savings in time, not really saying if we actually put the effort in, we can actually get to where we want to get to in a quicker and more sustainable way. But that thing of time, we've got a lot to do. People are under a lot of pressure. And I don't say any of this without recognizing that. I don't think that organizations are just chugging along, nice and comfortably. And here's another thing. Oh, that makes sense. Let's do it. People are under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. And here's someone else saying, oh, you've got to listen. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. It's tough. It's tough, especially going back to what we said before. If you haven't necessarily had to listen or seen other people have to listen to get to positions of authority. So yeah, I think it is. I asked the question actually, Tracy, whether I'm sort of naive here or just a bit romantic. Is that I think that when we get a new job, any of us, when we get a new job, we're super excited. We get that message that says, congratulations, you'll start on this date. You're really excited. You want to change the world. You're going to be part of a winning team, and you're going to really contribute to that winning team. And what is it that organizations do to take that excitement out of you? Which is, it's just, I've just seen it. It's just, why do we do that? People have got ideas. They want to be part of a winning team. They do care. You'll be surprised how much people care, I think, at times. Maybe the cynical head office has a different view. But look, I think that's why I ask them. Maybe I'm a bit naive about this. But I do believe that people have so much to offer us, to help us to get, let's say we're talking about sustainability. We're talking about DEI. Let's say we're talking about continuous improvement, real live business issues. Listening can help us to make better decisions and get us to where we need to get to.
I remember reading about one of the great American leaders of yesteryear. It could have been Andrew Carnegie or someone like that. And, he acknowledged that he didn't have, not that he didn't have all the answers, that he didn't have any of the answers, but he surrounded himself with people that had all of the answers. And one of the things that he used to do was to go and just queue up in the canteen with the staff and then go and sit, at our table and join the conversation. So he could really keep his thumb on the pulse of what was going on within the organization. And I think that so often leaders run the risk of being in their ivory tower. When Tim and I worked at a large corporate together, at the head office, there was a fantastic canteen, and yet none of the senior leadership were there. They would always go out for lunch somewhere. And it seemed like such a squandered opportunity to actually get close to the very people that were making the things happen within the organization. And I think that often leaders are perhaps just unsure about how they can bridge the gap between themselves at the very pinnacle, at the zenith of the organization, and you and me, working at the coalface.
Yeah.
I remember going to lunch at Hilti in Liechtenstein. That they make drills and stuff. And in the canteen, all the leadership would sit in the canteen and would have their meal out there. And it was like, this is what we do.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
And it was like, this is like part of the culture of the fact, and the leadership are told not to sit in cliques. The fact that they have to sit down and they're not to sit with their mates or their friends or stuff like that, to get other people and to actually to have conversations. It was fantastic. I actually saw it while we were queuing up.
Yeah, and I don't want to ever give the impression that all leaders are bad or don't get this. I've worked with some brilliant leaders, some really fantastic leaders, and they don't necessarily were never taught about listening, but they just get the fact that you need to bring your people with you. You need to create an environment where people want to come on that journey with you. And you see that in business, you see that in sport, you see that in all walks of life. So, that you can then employ something which we call listening is great. But there are many, many great leaders who get this, naturally. I think our challenge is, how do we get to your first question? How do we get more leaders to recognize that, what they need to do?
Do you think it's because listening is difficult? Because it may actually bring up things you go, well, that requires us to change, or that requires us to innovate.
Yeah.
Which for large organizations are hard things to do, aren't they?
Yeah, I think even on the individual level, we talk about psychological safety often from the perspective of the person, the member of staff, let's say the employee who wants to say something. But our research certainly found psychological safety challenges for the managers and the leaders. What if someone asks me a question I can't answer? What if I don't agree with what, or the company have given me a line to give and I agree with the sort of challenge from the employees? Somebody said to me not long ago, they were talking to a manager in their business or a leader in their business who said, I don't want to ask that question because, quotes, it will open a can of worms. And it's almost like, well, why wouldn't you? But that's so yes, I think there is a mindset challenge. Yeah, I've got enough on my plate. I can do without opening that can of worms because I've just got too much on. So I think it is it's a tough one.
Let's listen to some of the comments from our audience. Stephen Welsh shares, listening does not always lead to action. Yes, I think we heard Howard mention that earlier. Dana Poole shares, demonstrating active listening is best shown by follow-up actions. We have a LinkedIn user who says, if leaders learn to listen more, they can utilize their team to the highest level, using each individual's strengths to reach team and organizational goals. Flo Labrado shares with us, effective communication includes ensuring that the receiver gets it. They may not agree, but that they've at least heard. Another LinkedIn user sharing, poor onboarding and not hiring to true need creates the downward spiral of the disillusionment, in my opinion. And we have David Bellamy, who says, the people in the body of the organization are closest to the customer. Suppliers work with the process, technologies, and policies. They more often than not know what's working and what's not. Thank you all for these comments, and keep them coming. Keep your questions as well. We want to make sure that we listen.
Howard, I have a question. So in like all of these things that we've talked about, if we need to create more space to listen, in your experience, where are some of the places we can look to find maybe less productive activities that we could trade away to replace with listening?
Well, I think from a sort of communications engagement perspective, I think there's a lot of stuff that gets done which has very little impact. One of the companies, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say which, but one of the companies that I work for, a big company, did a lot of really good work on the sort of face of it to show on its sort of how it produced newsletters and it worked hard on improving its editorial, improving its personalization. But I just remember while I was working there, they were a really good sort of performing story would hit about 25,000-30,000 people in their organization. Rarely went above that, and usually it was below. So that's all good and fine. But there's 100,000 people working in that organization. So all of that resource and effort was spent on a quarter of the organization. So to me, I was just always questioning, why are we doing that at all? Why are we not investing in the things that reach many more people? Why are we not creating that opportunity for people to have dialogue and discussion, conversation? So I think that, we could, as comms people, we could look at what we do and say, is that really having an impact? I mean, all the money in the communications world is on platforms and intranets and technology. But I'm doing a project at the moment, just came off just for this one, with a series of blue collar workers, I guess, in manufacturing plants, people who are not even given company devices, don't have any any access to these channels. Yet where's the sort of time spent creating the content, and I don't think it's helping us. So I think that we could look at, are we really having the impact, in terms of what I do, are we really having the impact that we might have? And if not, what could we do that would actually have a lot more impact? And I think that's where you get into this thing around encouraging conversation, listening, understanding what we could do better.
Because we had I remember I worked for a company where we had this employee survey, and it was a classic, what we want is that we're going to carry on the beatings until the culture gets better, and you must fill it in, otherwise we're going to come around and hit you with a stick, and you must say how happy you are working here, and it was. So I used to just I used to answer it and then up it by whatever I felt. I upped it by one, just to because they said we're not tracking it. And you go, yeah, you are. You can track the IP address of my PC. So and I think we've all had that, and I think that we all look at employee surveys and are cynical about them.
I think the thing I've seen a lot of is like the 360-degree survey. So like you get to assess your manager and your coworkers in different departments, and they get you get 360-degree feedback on your performance, and there was so much work that went into it, and now you're trying to collect so much data from every piece, every employee, not just one survey, right? I gotta fill in surveys for a whole bunch of people, and I never saw anything come out of any of those. And I was on both the filling in survey side and coordinating the distribution of survey side. And I was like, what are we doing here? The concept is good, right? Like the concept of understanding how people are experiencing you in the organization, I think is great. But if we're not actually going to listen, or we don't have the culture for people to actually provide relevant information in their survey, then it's just a big waste of time.
There's so many good ideas which is just not very well implemented. And I think David Bellamy's just said on the comments, a deep problem with trust between organizations and their people. I agree in many places that's the case, because we don't respond in a way which is, sort of an adult to adult response. And we either think we know best, or we hide the data, or we just don't do anything with it because it takes too long. And, actually somebody I know who runs a 25-person organization said to me that in her organization, she'd made some changes to the benefits, but it had taken probably 6 to 9 months to actually get these changes made. They were quite complex. She said she was kicking herself because they came from, she forgot to go back and said, we've made these changes because these are what you asked for. And because it took so long, it probably didn't really have much of an impact that it might have done if she'd sort of reminded people that that's why that they'd made these changes sort of sometime earlier. So you've got to stay on it. I think you've got to sort of remember to do that. And again, it's not easy. I've been there, and you sort of get into these projects. They take longer than you think. You forget to sort of remind people. You don't want to over remind people. It's not easy. But, people think, you ask me for my voice, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But if I don't see that you're doing anything with it, why would I bother doing it again? And then you get into this sort of lack of trust. And the point that you made, Tim, absolutely. Yeah, that suspicion, and that's where the psychological safety bits come in. If I say something, I've seen this so often, in change. If I say something, do I really think that, I don't want to say the difficult thing because someone somewhere is going to note my name down. There'll be a list somewhere, with all the difficult people. Now, I've never seen this list. I don't believe, and actually a lot of leaders would say they prefer the difficult people to the people who aren't difficult. But in the minds of the employees, I don't want to put my head above the parapet and be difficult, because that might come back to haunt me. So I think that there's some big issues, fundamental issues here, but they're all solved by leaders. It's a leadership thing. That's why I said it's not a communications thing in that sense.
But isn't it there also an issue with the organisation itself, which is, you're asking people across the organisation for feedback on something. You better be damn sure you actually want to hear what they have to say, because like Tim said, when you are the company and you are saying to your employees, it's a happiness review. How happy are you? What you are hoping for is that they'll all come back and go 10 out of 10. This is my dream job. I love it. Everything's rosy. When they come back and say, this is the closest thing to purgatory you can have on earth, actually that's either shocking for you or potentially very hurtful for you if it's something that you feel really invested in. So how do organizations think about how they position in their own minds this ask of the audience?
No, I think, let's not get sort of caught up in that surveys are the only way of listening, and that only once a year that you should hear these things. I'd be disappointed if it is purgatory that people were only just finding that out when they ran a survey. That's why I think that being visible, using different methods of listening. Most companies have networks supporting different things, many different networks. I think you've got lots of opportunities to listen, and that's where we go back to put your listening strategy together in a way that's actually going to deliver value for you, rather than just do this because it's the way we've always done it, because we're tied into some contract with the big survey organization to ask this huge survey that really is no one quite understands half the questions. Let's actually have something that's going to give us value, and then it should be easier to deliver on that.
We have a question from the audience. Dana Poole asks, looking at the current job market and many companies doing layoffs, do you think it's an indication that leaders or the workforce are not listening to market trends and tech changes?
Or maybe they're not listening to each other either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think one of the things I try and think is that all the things I've said around listening doesn't stop an organization from making tough decisions. I believe you will perform better, but that might still mean that you're going to go through periods of struggle and periods where the economy is poor or for whatever reason, you're not performing as you need to. So you may need to do things like layoffs. I think the way that you handle those sort of things, the way you listen to people who are not leaving the organization is very important. But I don't know that, just the fact that, the job market per se, or the fact that there are layoffs going on is a reflection of whether companies are listening. They may well be listening, and their new strategy may be taking them in a different direction. So I don't know. It's an interesting question, Dana. I'm not sure that just because that there are layoffs and we have a fairly stagnant job market, I think, at the moment. I don't know whether that's. I mean, I think there's too many things to say. I mean, I think in this country, for example, the UK, I suspect a lot of businesses have been waiting for an election to happen. A bit of stability. It'll be interesting to see where we are, I think, towards the end of the year. The economy hasn't been brilliant. So I'm not sure about, that's market trends. I don't know. I'm waffling a little bit here. So it's going to be, all of these things are part of it, I guess.
What about the current trends of remote work and hybrid work? How is that impacting leaders' ability to listen?
It's a really interesting question. The channels and the techniques to listen are there. You can certainly do many different things just because somebody's not in an office. Again, my question would be maybe I'm never a fan of rephrasing the question, but I'm more interested in whether the leaders themselves are interested in how people are doing. And when we talked about the age of listening at the beginning of our book, one of the things that we talk about is the pandemic itself. And I think what we saw in the pandemic is that companies lent in a way they never had done before, to how their employees were feeling, how they were dealing with that situation. There was more effort taken. Comms people were front and center of their businesses in a way they probably hadn't been previously. Now, some people say that we've lost some of that, that positioning that we had during the pandemic. I tend to think it's sort of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I think that coming out of that, you see things like mental well-being far more on the agenda than you ever did. And again, if you're truly interested in mental well-being, then I think you have to be listening to how people are feeling, and other topics are on that sort of ESG agenda. So I think that there's more. The opportunity is there, to listen if you want to as a leader, regardless of where your people are based, and hopefully taking the lessons of the pandemic. You will be recognizing culture is changing, ways of working are changing. Not for everyone, of course. I think sometimes on that debate we forget, the blue collar people, the hospitality people, the sales people, maybe not changing quite as much for them, but a lot of the debate seems to be just on the people who aren't necessarily in the office as much as they were, or maybe they're being told they have to come back in the office in ways that they're a bit confused by. So I think all of that, the listening part's really important. If you're making some changes there, if you're actually sort of starting to say we need you back in the office, you better be listening. Otherwise, you're probably going to have a real issue on your hands, I think, and helping people through that change. So I think it's front and center, Rob, of that whole piece.
David Bellamy shares one of the things that organizations could do differently is try to get away from only finding out what they think is important, as in employer-led, and get more from employees about what they think is important, employee-led.
Yeah.
And I think I've shared this example on this show before, but I worked for an organization at one point that was like, what's important to you guys is what's important to us. So tell us what's important to you. And this was the like HR team, right? And so I went and I was like, okay, so like, 2 of the most meaningful things that we've done together as a business are these 2 things. And like immediately, without even thinking about it, they were just like, oh no, we're not going to do that. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, so do you think I'm going to tell you what I want next time? Because like, I know you don't care. You're saying it and you don't want to listen. So, and it's not like, because I think a couple people mentioned it, and you mentioned it too, Howard, like, it's not that we can necessarily execute on everything that every employee says all the time, right? It's just not feasible, especially for a large organization. But that feeling that, especially if it's being prompted from you, that someone listens, and then very minimally, if they can't deliver it, they know what that does, like what that means to you, right? Like I wish I could, but I can't, fiscal issues or whatever. But I think there's a way to even present not being able to do things in a way that allows people to feel like you said that they've been listened to. And that's the feeling I think that's the feeling we could create more intention around.
Well, you summed it up perfectly there, Tracy. I mean, why would you ask the question if you're not prepared to, if you only want one answer? It's almost like, here's a list of things that we want you to be interested in. Just select from this, otherwise don't bother.
Honestly, I'd rather you tell me that, right? Because then at least we have clear communication and that you're only willing to offer this. I can choose within this realm of things. So, okay, I'll go choose within that realm of things.
Yeah. And someone probably had a really good idea at some point by the time it actually happened, and then they started getting things they didn't want. So yeah, I think you've highlighted. I won't bother next time. I'm just not going to play.
Yeah.
So which things would you like most? Would you like lower pay, fewer holidays, both of the above?
I quit.
But bad news has to be delivered. I can't necessarily meet every expectation. We can't have free lunch in the cafeteria every day. How do you balance the making sure they felt heard with delivering what might not be the answer they want?
Yeah, I think I'm going to sum it up by saying, treat people like adults. You just treat people like adults. You actually talk to them properly, explain why things are, give them a chance to have go use the same terms, conversation, dialogue, on an adult to adult basis. I think you'd be surprised that people get it. They understand things are tough. People who are working in a company know that performance isn't great because the order book's not as great, or because the sales aren't coming through. They get it, right? And so I think treating people as adults will be a really good sort of way of just following. Just a good thing to live by, and then look, people get that you have to do. It's not that you can't take bad news. I think it's you can't take either uncertainty, which often comes because I'm a bit nervous about giving you the bad news, or I can't take it if it's told to me like I'm some small child and you're the sort of benevolent parent telling me the bad news. Treat me right, and guess what? I'll perform for you, and I'll come back and I'll perform the next day.
Excellent. Howard, this has been great. Where can people learn more? How can they get in touch with you?
So certainly they can get in touch. I hope that people connect on LinkedIn. Howard Craze, obviously at Howard Craze. The book is Leading the Listening Organization. Thank you, Tim. Leading the Listening Organization. So that's available. You can go to my website, true-communications.com. And the resources page you can find, or go to the Amazon. Routledge is the publisher. You can get it from the Routledge site. Amazon have it. And yeah, please connect. I mean, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the conversation with folks.
Excellent. We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live and click on newsletter. Howard, on behalf of the panelists and to our audience, thank you for being here. Thank you all for being an active part of today's show. And we'll see you next time on the Digital Download.